I was watching some videos about these P320s and finally had, talked to a guy who mentioned how to test if this sear was making good engagement with the striker or not. And I had mentioned that in order to make this mechanism a little bit safer, at least as safe as I would like to see it be, that I could grind a little bit on the sear itself, kind of like, I don't know if you guys have ever done any smithing on AR-15s or on 1911 sears and triggers and hammers, but most of your mil-spec ones, as you pull the trigger, it actually engages the spring of the hammer a little more before it breaks. And so part of that creep that you feel, or that weight of that trigger and the travel, is that the way the sear is engaged against the notch is that when you pull the trigger, as the way the geometry of the two devices fit together, it actually forces the hammer and then it breaks. And it's the same with 1911s, it's the same with AR-15s. I assume it's similar with a lot of triggers that haven't been worked over, is that they all, the way the geometry is when you have two things that move at an angle, the one will be like this, and even if they're perfectly married, as it moves on a pivot point, you see it's going to force that thing away until it slips over the top and breaks. So that I could have potentially ground the sear to a little different geometry, as well as the hook on the striker to a little different geometry, so that sits in a more permanent fashion there. And yeah, it would be to the detriment of the trigger a little bit, but I don't have a real big problem with these triggers because the travel isn't particularly long. Once you hit the wall, the travel is really short, and when I'm shooting, this is my match gun. And when I'm shooting in matches, I really don't seem to have any trigger problems when I'm using this gun. So what I've done is taken it apart and checked. See, I can see right there where the striker is, and I can actually see with my eye. The camera can't pick it up in there because it's dark, but I can actually see the sear as well. And so when I've got this here, I can hold the weapon in battery and look at those, and I can physically see that, get it lined up here, I can physically see that? The sear's moving, and I can physically see it forcing the striker back a little bit before it breaks and cuts it loose. So I don't know if that's due to, these are enhanced models, so this is after the recall and enhancement on all of these components. So it has the second notch, it has the trigger interlock, which is a sear or a striker block up in there. It also has the battery plunger, whether the gun's in battery or not. So it has all of these things, but I wanted to see if they had fixed the trigger geometry or not, and to where it actually, as you squeeze the trigger, it actually cocks the gun a little bit more. It applies more pressure rearward before it breaks and lets it slam, which tells me that when the thing is locked and cocked in battery, that can't just wiggle and fall away, because it's actually, by the geometry of it, it's like locked in behind there. So it actually has to force it back a little bit as it breaks. So I've done trigger work on all of my AR triggers, but what we're going to do here is try to display what I was talking about, what you can't maybe see in the other video, and you can really see the hammer of this. So I've got this weapon here, and I'm going to squeeze the trigger gently, and this isn't going to be as pronounced as like a regular mil-spec trigger, because what this is this was a mil-spec trigger, and then I have, you know, done a trigger job on it. So it's not going to be as pronounced, but I stop my trigger job geometry change and polishing right when I can just barely detect this, but you're still going to be able to see it. Right there. Right there, see? It only does it once per... See? That hammer moves a tiny bit as a function of the sear dropping. So what you get is kind of a weird little stage where it basically it moves that hammer, it forces it back a little bit before it drops. And what that means is that your sear to hammer geometry is still not such that it's a hair trigger. It's still locked in. When it's locked up, that it has to go force past the hammer spring a little ways, so it's still locked in there. So that's what I'm talking about with those, with that sear and striker system, is that you can definitely see it visibly doing that, the same as this. So that's what I'm talking about there. Anyway, I don't know if that helps anybody, but I've been curious about that, and I've been, I don't know, a little bit kind of distrusting of these machines since I started reading a little more about this. So, I mean, as you can see, both of mine have manual safeties on them, but this is just a trigger block in this gun. All this does is blocks the trigger bar. When the gun's on safe, see, as you can see, when this gun's on safe, as it is on safe, but you can still push the sear down. So it's not a sear block at all, it's just a trigger block. So even if you're, you know, talking about a P320 and, you know, guys not carrying them with the safety, or that, you know, they need to have a safety, I agree. I think they should have a thumb safety or a trigger safety like a Glock. What I take an issue with is that, you know, that safety really is only good to prevent you from squeezing the trigger as you draw the weapon, or to keep you from, you know, depressing the trigger as you holster the weapon. You know, if you caught the trigger on a piece of your holster and then shot a hole through your leg. But the issue that guys are having, which is they're saying the vibration turning loose this sear, well, having it on safe doesn't actually do anything for that, because it's not a sear block. It just is a trigger block only. So anyway, that being said, I at least understood that part of the fire control unit enough to know that this safety mechanism wasn't going to keep me from having an uncommanded discharge, if that is in fact what they've been having. This sear, you might be able to see it on here, on the left side there, there's a shiny spot right along that edge. So it does actually display some wear on the sear that I wouldn't exactly expect to see in a high quality firearm. So I've heard that this is, you know, sintered, you know, MIM, sintered is the other term for that. So I've heard that this is a sintered part, but I can't say for sure. It seems to be the general consensus, but it's not it's not exactly what I'd expect to see in a very high quality firearm. Like even my Turkish 1911s have very, very, very hard sears and trigger parts and hammers. So this just isn't exactly what I'd expect to see. So we'll see as that wears more, if that begins to cause a situation where I might, if that begins to cause a situation where I might want to look at either getting my sear replaced or at, replacing this weapon system with something a little different. I say this is my competition gun, but I mean, I do like to carry it in a holster around my yard and property, because it's a 5-inch gun and it's very accurate and shoots well. I would gladly hunt with this pistol. So anyway, I hope that answers some questions. I haven't done this with both of my handguns yet. I'm gonna do it to my M18 as well, but from what it looks like, I mean, I'm assuming they're both P320 fire control units. I assume the geometry is the same on both of them since it's an MIM part. So I would assume that they're both, as you pull the trigger, that it actually cocks the striker before it breaks. So, which tells me that it's locked in there, and it would take something pretty catastrophic to make it drop in my particular one. So they're saying that it's like, what, 1 in 100 guns is going to have this problem. And so, perhaps just check and see if your geometry is good. If it cocks the striker a little bit further before it breaks, then you're probably in pretty good shape. And if it doesn't, then, a little bit of filing on that sear to give it a more aggressive hook geometry instead of straight up and down, so that way it really has to cock the thing a little bit before it breaks loose. Might be what you need. It might be wise even if you're unsure. So